France has accused Turkish and Azerbaijani secret services of fomenting unrest in the small overseas territory of New Caledonia. If this headline left you scratching your head because the only other time you heard of New Caledonia was that time in 3rd grade geography when you were checking how fast you can spin the classroom globe and it happened to come to a stop in the middle of the Pacific Ocean, and you noticed it was in fact a bit far from Europe. Don't worry, we've all been there. I did a double take when I first read it myself, but then I decided to take a closer look. And what I learned was nothing short of fascinating. But is there any merit to the accusation? Who are the indigenous Kanak people, and is their struggle for independence entirely fabricated? And what even be New Caledonia anyway? New Caledonia is a French overseas territory located in the southwest Pacific Ocean. It comprises a group of islands with its capital Nouméa sitting on the largest island of Grande Terre. The population includes the indigenous Kanak people, who make up about 41%, and Europeans, who make up about 24%, alongside other diverse groups. The islands were first annexed by France in 1853, making New Caledonia a colony of France, until 1946, when it was given special status and became an overseas territory of France. The people of New Caledonia, including the indigenous Kanak people, became French citizens, gaining the same rights and responsibilities as citizens in mainland France. In 1953, the Union Calédonienne political party was formed, advocating for greater autonomy. In 1984, several pro-independence groups united to form the Kanak and Socialist National Liberation Front. This pro-independence movement gained momentum in the 80s, eventually culminating in violent clashes. As a result, the Nouméa Accord was signed in 1998. This treaty was a promise by the French government to grant increased political power to the indigenous Kanak population over a 20-year transition period and hold up to 3 referendums on New Caledonia's independence. And indeed, 20 years later, in 2018, the first referendum was held, with 56.7% of New Caledonians voting to remain part of France. The second referendum was held in 2020, with 53.3% voting to stay French. And the final referendum, held in 2021, was boycotted by the pro-independence groups, resulting in 96.5% vote to remain part of France. And thus, with the third and final vote having rejected independence, under the Nouméa Accord, France will continue to control the military, foreign policy, immigration, police, and currency in New Caledonia. Okay, but when do the secret agents come in, I hear you ask? It's no secret that France has recently emerged as one of the most outspoken critics of the Turkish-backed Azerbaijani regime's atrocities committed against Armenians. Now imagine you were up against a country far more powerful than yourself. Your best strategy would likely be to look for a point of vulnerability, perhaps a place where tensions are high, with narrow referendum results and episodes of violent unrest. This would present an opportunity. In 2023, during a meeting in Baku, Azerbaijan, the Baku Initiative Group Against French Colonialism was established. It aims to eliminate the policy of neo-colonialism in France. Later that same year, French intelligence observed 2 Azerbaijani women posing as journalists traveled to Nouméa to follow the visit of the French Armed Forces Minister. These 2 women were linked to intelligence services in Baku. One of them was refused entry, while the other ended up writing several articles for the Azerbaijani state news agency about the mobilization of pro-independence fighters. On February 24, 2024, Kanak representatives attended a conference on decolonization in Ankara, Turkey, an ally of Azerbaijan. Other parties present at this conference were French Polynesia, French Guinea, Martinique, and Guadeloupe. In April of 2024, a pro-independence New Caledonian delegation visited Azerbaijan, during which they signed a memorandum of cooperation. The travel expenses were covered by Azerbaijan. News of this memorandum triggered a controversy in New Caledonia. Critics denounced it as a partisan instrument serving foreign powers and a misuse of public funds. They called for the agreement with Azerbaijan to be null and void, but the pro-independence party rejected this call. A month later, in May, violent protests erupted in Noumea over an amendment that would allow French citizens who had been residing in New Caledonia uninterruptedly for over 10 years to vote in local elections. As a result of the unrest, a curfew was imposed and security forces were mobilized. The unrest quickly escalated to riots, looting of shops and cars. At least 54 officers have been injured to date, multiple shootings, and the deaths of 6 people. There was also an attempt of a prison breakout which was thwarted. Sure enough, Azerbaijani flags started popping up at separatist protests, sometimes alongside Russian flags or banners with pro-Russian messages. The French government cited a disinformation campaign which included images showing French police officers aiming rifles at dead Kanaks. This campaign was quite massive, with around 4,000 posts generated by networks of pro-Azerbaijan accounts. TikTok was banned on the archipelago, citing the app's role in spreading messages of hatred and calls for violence. French intelligence accused Azerbaijan and Turkey, backed by Russia and China, of actively supporting the violence. But the question remains, why? The situation is developing as we speak, with the BBC reporting today that the capital is under siege. Look, New Caledonians, indigenous Kanak, are real people with a real struggle for independence. Let's not minimize that. However, at best, the minority is using violence to force their will onto the majority. And at worst, they are actively collaborating with hostile states with ulterior motives. I mean, where can you even buy this t-shirt in New Caledonia? Anyway, the French claim of Turkish and Russian involvement does make sense. Turkey is Azerbaijan's biggest ally and backer, that much is obvious. As for Russia and Azerbaijan have signed several alliance-level agreements since the Ukraine war started, and their interests very much align here as well. Russia sees France as a NATO adversary and a key supporter of Ukraine. Russia also regularly uses Azerbaijan to punish Armenia for pivoting west, so it's not totally far-fetched that this relationship extends against France as well. For its own role, Azerbaijan likely justifies its information warfare against France as retaliation against France's support for Armenia. But if France supports the Armenian cause in Artsakh, why shouldn't Azerbaijan support the Kanaks in response? Well, for one, the Armenians of Artsakh were fighting to defend an emerging democracy against a tyrannical regime. On the other hand, the Kanaks are making alliances with said tyrannical regime to fight a fully democratic country. In practical terms, France has relied on dialogue and diplomacy in New Caledonia, offering the natives a path to independence that was ultimately rejected by the voters in 3 democratic referendums. In stark contrast, the Azerbaijani regime ignored all referendums, never gave Armenians a path to any degree of autonomy, and then ethnically cleansed Artsakh of its indigenous Armenians. But wait! There's more! They then proceeded to make extraterritorial claims on Armenia while blaming France of neocolonialism. I mean, the level of hypocrisy is almost funny. But what can you realistically expect from the president who just last month called Russia a key country for regional security?